So, am I taking it away?
Yeah.
Okay. Uh, Hi, everybody. So crazy doing stuff like this still. But in any case, we had the idea that the three of us would talk. Leanne, of course, did the cover for this incredible book. And and Makenna's book is just so great. And we thought it would be fun to have a three-way conversation about some of the ideas in the book and just anything. We all have come up with questions for the other two. Like everyone's come up with questions for everyone. So we're going to have a conversation asking each other questions. Maybe Makenna will read. We'll see how things go. And then we'll take questions at the end of, as Mara said, at the end of all this. Okay, should I start?
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a list of questions. One of them is a question actually to both of you, because I think the book is a lot about how women see other women, and the way that we can project sort of ideal lives onto each other, especially through the internet. And, envy is one of the 7 deadly sins. And I was thinking, reading the book, about the cultivation of envy in others. And like that is sort of one of the contemporary sins that we indulge in. And so my question for both of you is about this cultivation of envy, and specifically, for Leanne, like, how does, as somebody who works in design, like, and whose books have photography in them so much, do you think there's something about the photographic medium that allows this kind of projection and envy? And is there something? And Makenna, like, did you ever have well, I've got an actually much bigger question for you. But basically, what I think for me works so well about your book, one of the things that works so well about your book, besides like the incredible prose, is the way that Alma, the protagonist, envies Celeste. The reader feels that same way about Alma. And so there's some way in which you as a reader are implicated in this projection and desire and comparison of your own life. At the same time that Alma is doing that, the reader is doing that to Alma. And I wonder how conscious you were of that, and creating that. So, okay, there's like a bunch of questions, but hopefully we can sort through them and then keep going.
Should I start? Well, first I just want to say thank you so much to McNally Jackson, and also to Sheila and Leanne, who are have been big inspirations for me, and now friends and collaborators a little bit on this, a little bit. And it's a real honor to be like in this weird room with you. Truly, like I don't know, it's intense. And I mean, I think for me, when I hear the word envy, and when I think about the idea of like one woman wanting what another woman has, I immediately think of the idea of womanhood and what womanhood is and how we define it and how it is objectified or created as an idea, and where the idea of what womanhood is comes from and how it has been created. And I'm not, an expert in women's studies or the history of women and women's movements, but hold on, I have to go into speaker view, sorry. But basically I think that the idea of envy has to do with the idea of the self, and the idea of the self, at least in my experience of being a woman, has been determined by the world's experience or decisions of me. And that I don't know existentially where the self begins and society ends, and which, like, for example, growing up, as a young girl, it's like if you were pretty, the boys would like you, and if you were pretty, the girls would like you, and if you weren't pretty, well, then it didn't then you didn't have the same kind of cachet. But if you were too pretty, then it was bad. And if you were aware of your prettiness, that was also bad. If you were sublimated it too much. So it's like everything about womanhood and society together has been a social thing. and I don't mean like cliques, but a social construct. And so I wonder if men, or those who identify as men, experience wanting or longing or envy in the same way and under the same terms. So one of the things that surprised me about The Shame has been the response from male readers, and how so often people have said, you know, I think because there's a woman on the cover and all of the blurbers that I had are women, and Leanne, who designed the cover, is a woman, and in fact, everybody at the publisher is a woman except for the publisher himself. And the characters are predominantly women in the book. Does that mean it's a book about women? A lot of men have told me it's like been, you know, reading the inside of their own mind, and yet they know it's not for them. And so that confuses them. And so I guess I just think about the idea of projection, as you say, as inherent to humanity, and envy as inherent to humanity. And just because a woman writes about or thinks about envy and projection and humanity, to me, it's about power and society and selfhood and less about womanhood, even though, of course, womanhood is central to it. I often feel like if I talk too much about that, then I'll write an essay about period underwear, which is, you know, what I just did, but like, I don't know. So does that make sense? Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Nothing. Did you want, but back to Sheila's question though, Makenna, did you want Alma to be as seductive as Celeste?
Right. So for people who haven't read the book, I should say that, or who don't know about it, the plot is essentially this woman, the narrator, Alma, who lives a kind of bucolic life in remote Vermont with her 2 young children and her philosophy professor husband. And they homestead and they live close to the land and close to their ethics. And she feels trapped by motherhood, and she feels like she has no place in the world outside of this little universe that she's created. So basically the gist of the plot is that she reads as a way to connect with the outside world of women writers and storytelling, and eventually decides she should write a novel of her own as a way to be a part of this community. That's the only way she'll feel like her life has meaning. And it's all about how to craft a character based on her life to understand her life. And she becomes fixated on with a woman online that she calls Celeste, who has, we don't know her real name, and becomes fixated on her and loses her project. And so basically, I think, I mean, it goes, there's so many roots to it, but the idea is, psychoanalytically, it's, we project onto other people as a way to understand our dilemmas and the way that we interpret our reality. And it's much easier to interpret our reality through our interpretations of other people and other objects and things. So I'm not sure it matters how great one's life is. Someone else's life is always going to appear more meaningful in the ways where ours feels like it's lacking meaning. And so regardless of what one has, I don't think that that materializes into happiness. I don't think that having something or having all of the things translates into, you know, being happy. And so I think it's wonderful, Sheila, that you would suggest that the reader feels that way about Alma. Maybe I didn't, but I think that that's the unconscious part that's interesting, perhaps for me to now think about. But how, of course, there's unhappiness and there's a continuum of meaning and becoming and what that means. And Sheila, you've written about this and how should a person be, and motherhood and everything that, and Leanne too, in your work. So I'm interested in how, you know, it goes also to the idea of interpretation, you know, like how we interpret our own lives as a kind of interpretation of society at large anyway. But That was a really long kind of
No,
rambling.
you got the outline in there too, which is good for everyone. I think you do something with photography in the book. Sheila brought up photography. I think what you talk about, it's such a sort of quietly modern book, because you're describing what's essentially an emotion driven by photography, driven by photographic medium, and you're not showing a single image in it. And I always think that that's super powerful. As Sheila knows, when you can't see something and you describe photographic images that we all know how to read. But what the characters do, both you as an author with Alma and Celeste, is actually take a look. We are able to sort of see our own lives and value them, Celeste especially, and kind of sell them back both to oneself, Celeste taking the pictures and posting them, sort of saying, I have this whole theory that you basically post when you're the most depressed and wretched, and like it's just when you do that. But I don't know, just I really like how you talked about photographs and about photography. And again, Sheila, just going back to your question, like the cultivation of envy, envy's good for business, and these social media platforms are like, they want us to buy stuff. So it's all this very, very interesting salesmanship that's going on, sort of us trying to be convinced that our own lives are beautiful, trying to drive envy, and then these platforms relying on us to like, dislike, spend 5 seconds on, scroll, blah, blah, blah. I mean, the other thing I love, Makenna, was how your book, the momentum of the book matched and mirrored the sort of momentum of scrolling. That was another really sort of, I don't know if you did that intentionally, but it worked. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Sheila, please.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, in response to what Leanne was saying, like, I know, Makenna, you've talked about, and you just talked about, like, sort of the psyche being split. And there's a way in which in the book that's resolved in some sense, at least temporarily at the end. She doesn't have her lost self in Celeste, ultimately. And, I was like, I had this question, like, does capitalism in particular split the psyche? I mean, is there something about being consumers that does that to us? And then this other question is, like, which I was curious about, is what part of the psyche does Celeste get? What part of Alma's psyche is Celeste the container for?
Well, I should say that's a good question. I mean, I think the question is that no one has really asked me yet is, does Celeste exist? I mean, one of the things is, like, this goes back to, like, the Kleinian theory of object relations, and how at a very early age, infants attach. I'm probably going to be butchering this theory right now because I'm a little, like, fractured on Zoom, but the idea that we connect with objects and we give objects meaning because they're in our vision, kind of like a photograph, like in the way that you look through a scrapbook of your life or of your parents' lives, and you see a life, you see a whole generation, and you can just scroll through, and maybe you've heard stories about the photographs and you recognize memories, and you're building a whole history. And at the end of the scrapbook, you say, well, that was grandma, I feel a sense of her now. And so, is that grandma, or is that the story in one's mind that we are creating for grandma, that we are, from the stories that we've heard, from the stories that we want to be true, from the things we fear that were true? What are our memories, and where do they come from? And so where do our projections come from? And I think in social media in particular, and perhaps maybe art and film and TV and any kind of artistic medium, do we look and see our own face? Really? Is that what we're looking for? Are we looking for our own face? And is it like we're trying, or maybe that's a certain type of person who's looking at it as if it were a mirror and trying to see the truth about themselves through sorting the truths of everybody else. And then when we ourselves contribute to that, and I would say as an artist, I identify with this, not on social media because I'm barely on it and I'm doing it entirely to sell myself, 100% unabashedly, buy me and sell me. I still like, I think as an artist, it's like, what is the performance of living and presentation that is me becoming? Like, how do I become myself? Because I'm never going to be myself, but what's the journey of becoming, and how is that related to what I'm looking for? So blah, blah, blah. Every character in this book I wrote not as a character, but as a projection of myself, actually, or Alma, who is not myself, but me projecting onto her, and then the subsequent projections of the husband is not really the husband, certainly not my husband, but he's not even the husband. It's Alma's interpretation of her husband and how that reflects back to the story that she's telling herself. So then she's writing a story about herself. Then she's commissioned to write a story about her life from a different angle. One is supposed to be art that has a social resonance, or that's, I don't know, revolutionary in terms of her own intellect. And the other one's about selling something. What's the difference? So I don't know. And I think about this. This was one of my questions for you guys. I mean, I have so many, honestly, that there's not enough minutes in the day. But I think one of the things that the literary world likes to do is they like to, and maybe people, is categorize and sort. And so they like to say, this is true, this is not true, this is nonfiction, and this is fiction. And both of you are brilliant and celebrated for blending genre and saying, actually, in fact, what's true isn't true, and what's not true is also not true. What is reality? And so I'm interested in basically, what is the difference between documentary and fiction to you? And how does that relate to a lot of these questions? Like, are characters really characters? Why have you chosen to interpret fiction in the way that you both have interpreted it? And together in some ways.
You go, Leanne.
No, you go.
No, you go.
Well, I liked your question, Makenna. So what's the difference between documentary and
Imagination, say.
an imagination?
Fiction.
Yeah. I mean, I like playing with the reader's trust and the reader's faith in, I don't know, I mean, in familiarity. I don't know, that I think photography is fiction. I really do. And I mean, I'm speaking the way that I use photography in my stories and in my books. I use it as a fictional tool because we all look at it as a trustworthy medium. And I feel like that kind of gets past the sort of murky fiction problem for me, sort of like the invention of a world. I'm sort of saying, well, the world I'm inventing looks exactly like this one. Here's a picture to prove it, rather than kind of, and I can't write fiction. I've really, it scares the crap out of me, and the only way I can do it is through through photography, because that's the way I can have it be what's the word, veritable, like have it have veracity for me. But it's sort of like being left-handed or something. Like I can't write fiction, so I do it with like this way. So I again, it is sort of just relying on reality, a version of reality. Mm-hmm. But Sheila, you go.
Yeah, it's not so different, but I just want to comment on how you answered that, because I think like you answered that being saying like, I can't do this, so therefore I'm doing this. And I just want to like sort of like say that I think that's always the way that people ultimately end up creating, is like, there's things you just can't do, because I think there's certain things that all of us can't do. And I think like as artists, the reason we can't do certain things is because we deeply don't believe in them. And so it's not a lack of skill, it's actually like a lack of belief that creates those inabilities. And like, if you try to do the things that you can't do in art, you're going to make something false for that very reason. So to answer Makenna's question with that as the prelude to it, like, I also couldn't, after a certain point in my life, like so-called write fiction that interested me, like I can write it, like it's almost too easy. Like I'll just start writing and it'll be a narrative that just came out of my imagination, but it won't be anchored in any way that keeps me curious about it.
You okay?
Oh, you're muted.
What happened, Sheila? You're doing this on purpose.
There's a ghost.
Oh,
Okay, you're back.
I don't know what happened there. Yeah, so I feel like after a certain age, I lost what I would identify as my imagination. And that age was quite young, like that age was like 24 or something. Like I just didn't have an imagination in the way that I'd always understood the word imagination. And so I think it's because at that point in my life, I was thinking a lot about the life that I was living, because the most important questions that I had to answer as a human were about my life. They weren't about, they were just about my life. Like when you're in your 20s, those are a lot of the important questions that if you're a certain kind of person, you need to answer. And to write about, to try to answer those questions without touching my actual life in the writing of it just wouldn't have made any sense, like as an equation. You know, if you're a scientist and you're interested in birds, like you have to work with birds, you know. So if you're interested in the development of personality or character or morality in yourself as a human, then of course that's going to, when you write, you're going to be looking at yourself, and then of course it becomes transformed because you're ultimately making a work of art, you know. But the transformation happens after the investigation. I have a question, sort of like, Leanne and I were just talking before this whole thing started about this beautiful passage in your book, Makenna, where you sort of go through the seasons of life on a homestead. And, you know, she describes what it's like in the fall and in the summer and in the spring, and you just sort of see the texture of life. And I was thinking about seasons in a different way, like the seasons of life, the seasons, you know, and the season of middle age, because in some way I feel like your book is about the season of, let's say, early middle age. And I recognize this in a lot of conversations with people I'm having, that if you're lucky enough to achieve some sort of stability or some semblance within the neighborhood of what you were aiming for in life, after that, the season, this middle age season, there's a kind of not knowing what to do next with that, you know, like the struggle seems to have plateaued. And I feel like the book, which is sort of about escape, like you're writing in some ways about the season of escape, which is this, you know, she set up her life, she's found the home, she's got the children and the work and the husband and da-da-da, and now what's left to do? We almost don't know how to be in that plateau.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say the season of escape, because the book actually, the main timeline of it, or the sort of center timeline thread, is in the fall, which is right before the winter. And someone just described the moment that we're in right now as a taste of eternal winter. And I thought, well, yeah, that sounds about right. Maybe it's not the eternal winter, but certainly there's a feeling of at least now structurally and socially, there's a feeling of a bottoming out. Like the bottom was never really there, but now we're sort of below the bottom not being there, you know, as a society. Certain people have been there, you know, all along, and they're like, yeah, you know, we're down here going, yeah, now you see that, you know, you can't leave your house safely or whatever. But I think that at any stage of life, and not that I know any other stage of life than the stages of life that have led me to this stage, that it seems to me that humans are just seeking a sense of truth and a sense of resolution. And that the resolution is to whatever problem or drama or reality any one person is living in, which is on a continuum of misery to joy, depending on, you know, the standings of one life, one socioeconomic status, or just their temperament. And I think for me, my question was, which is why, Sheila, your book, How Should a Person Be? When I came upon it, I thought, well, this is a philosophy, actually, that reminded me of the philosophy and the social theory that had changed my life as an undergraduate. Not that I ever was a graduate, you know, in college, of this idea that there's a collective unconscious that might transcend duality, if that makes sense. Like perhaps, like, and maybe there's duality, there's black and white and yes and no, and you know, angry and what's the opposite of anger? Compassion. There is nothing, it's just anger. But that, like, perhaps those dualities live within a larger feeling of, I don't even want to say humanity, but oneness. And I don't want to sound like, you know, this is not about mindfulness necessarily, but this idea that are we all searching for a resolution of this fractured separateness? Of course, separateness is really important, and categories and divisions can be extremely important biologically. I mean, everywhere. Like, it's not that oneness is the goal, but I think that there's a human drive for resolution and truth of what is, you know, like, I think about this I was just talking to my friend about this today, about what happens when you read, because I said to her, I said, tonight I get to talk to two brilliant women whose art has changed my life. But your art is not here in this room. You're here in this room, but your art exists as like in the ether. And what does that mean, you know, to connect to something that exists outside of a physical realm? And I think that photography allows us to momentarily exist in other universes quickly. I'm sort of rambling, but like, I think that that's what we're searching for. And what ends up happening is that we choose things to fixate on that are not necessarily where we need to go. They don't necessarily offer us refuge, even if they feel so right.
Yeah, I mean, fixate such a good term, because I mean, that's both an emotion behind looking at an image, and you know, there's also just the physical, the fixative that stops the process of, you know, well, not anymore digitally, but the fixative that you would put the photographic print in so it wouldn't overdevelop. I mean, it would just be amazing if every image weren't fixed, if everything just faded to black, like everything sort of was there for, it's almost like Instagram stories rather than Instagram, which I think would be probably healthier for us all, if everything just did have a shelf life rather than, and then it wouldn't allow us to fixate on it or something. Sorry, now I'm rambling.
This reminds me, this word fix. I was in a relationship a number of years ago, and I talked to this friend of mine, Stanley Siegel, who's like a friend, but he's also a psychoanalyst or whatever. And he, you know, I was telling him about this relationship. It was like 9 months into it, and I was not very happy in it. And he was like, it sounds like this is a place where you could become fixed. And I remember like not knowing which way he meant it. Like, do you mean where I could become fixed and therefore better, or like stuck? And this and I'm not even sure why it was such that I couldn't ask, which do you mean? But I remember like taking the bus home from New York for like 12 hours and like thinking about like, what is the relationship between those two senses? Like, if it's a relationship where you can become fixed and it means both those things, both kind of scary. I mean, actually, when you think about it, do you want to become fixed? Like, well, and then that third version, fixed, where you fix an animal and you're neutered. I mean, there's just, I got home and broke up with the guy right away.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the fixed thing, it's interesting because I think that when I think about fixed, I think about rage actually. And I think about the things that fill me with rage, and that like I can't, that I just like vibrate. And the hypocrisy of progressives and so-called liberals is something that fixes me, that puts me in a fix, and that anchors me in a way that even now talking about it, I get sweaty and stressed out. And I think a lot about a lot of what I was trying to write in this book was writing into that sort of rage of how could it be that a life ethically lived, a life that says, a choice to live in a way that says, I choose to do less harm. I choose to, I choose to tiptoe on the earth. I choose to do like live according to my deepest beliefs. And how, like, is that enough? Is that enough to affect change or to redistribute or out? And the kind of like tension between living according to virtue versus hiding behind an ethic, hiding behind ethics as a way to insulate oneself from the thing we so desperately don't want to be. And so, and I know that my rage is because I'm hooked, because it's my shadow, because I see myself in it, and I fear for myself, and I fear that I am the thing I fear the most, and I am the problem. And that even if I eradicated myself, the problem of me would still exist, because it's not just me in my body, it's me in the system. It's my role in the system, and the system will persist. My soul may persist, and the system surely will, unless there's a revolution. But like, I think about how, I don't know, like the idea of private contentment and how we nurture ourselves as a kind of hiding from the work that we need to do as a society. And again, even saying that, like, what have I done lately? So I think about our shadow selves and how Alma and Celeste are in ways shadows of each other, and how can we make sense of our shadows as a way to get closer to becoming, which can then, rise up. I mean, I don't know, like, it feels really fucking urgent right now to me.
This leads to my question for you both, which is, do we have an appetite for the lives of strangers the way we have an appetite for self-help? Is it the same appetite, or, when is it an education and when is it sort of aspiration? Do you want to go first, Makenna, or?
Oh, I've talked so much. Sheila, you take it.
This is your book launch. This is your book launch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know how to unpack that, because like I've definitely, like, I recently had a moment of self-care where I went to a body worker who, it's like not even the right word, because she's like a portal into another universe. And I went to her and I had a question, and I talked, and then she put me on the table and then did some trigger body work. And then literally we were discussing things in a way that I actually did feel like I was out of my body and experiencing different time within the same time, past, present, future, and different dimensions. And that felt very holistic and grounding and rewarding. And I paid her the money, and then I left. And I guess I think it's important. Oh yeah, that's why I bring it up. She said something to me because I said, well, what's the point of even making art? You know, like, who cares? Why do I feel so compelled to do something that is ultimately so, or could be so fraught with, you know, as is often women artists have been accused of, narcissism, right? Of just navel gazing, as opposed to, you know, I don't know, philosophy that extends thought. I don't know, but which is what I think of both of you, not myself. and I think, well, why? Like, is it, maybe it's more important to, and then there's like a list of a million different things. And she said, you know, well, what if you thought of it differently, as like every act of intention and of commitment and practice to something, then like the energetic vibrations like go up, you know, into here, and then whatever's in the ether sees it as a map, and that's a map of intention or a map of consciousness, and that map of every different person doing those same things is a movement. We just can't see it, and we can't name it, and we don't know how to interpret it. But what if that was a possibility? And so I think that's what we're all looking for, quite frankly. And we just look for it in other people. We look for it in art. We look for it in really nice sweaters. We look for it in whatever we look for it and wear. And we always come back, like, right, the sweater arrives in the mail and you can't wait to open it. And there it is, half your paycheck. You put it on and you know, your pits still stink. It's like you can't escape the stench of your own self, of your own reality. So I don't know if there's a difference, Leanne. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, that it's true. It's true. I like how you melded those together. One of the other questions I had was, because of the social media platform of the images, what ads would have come up as Alma was looking at Celeste? Like, I was just thinking, like, what is she being sold that is, you know, that is actually making her spend money as she watches Celeste, and what else is she feeding while she's being fed?
Well, that I would say is the insidiousness of our data and how we give it away. And I think that we have this idea that, I mean, this is this ultimate myth that social media or the internet is individuality and is you know, choice, that it's a choice that we're making every time we log on, that this is our self-care. Like, I get to look at my friends now, I can see what they're doing. They are listening. They're like, it's not even just what you're looking at. They listen, and you said okay. Like, we all said okay. We said agree, and then we let them look at our actions, and now we act according to their interpretation of us. And so I think that that's what I was also trying to explore, is like, Alma decides she's intellectually compelled by the women she reads, and then she's distracted by a woman she sees, and then everything that woman does then affects every decision or moral quandary that she experiences. And in the end, where is the individual?
Mm-hmm.
I think we should get questions now, because we've got about 10-15 minutes left. So you can just enter them in the Zoom group chat if you have them, and then I'll read them out. And in the meanwhile, I just want to also like quickly answer, Leanne, your question and everything that we're talking about. I was just watching this reality show called Alone, where these men go off into the wilderness and they're all alone. And there's 10 of them, and the question is like, who's gonna last the longest? And for the first 5 days, it's all about, where can I find water, fresh water? How can I feed myself? Can I build a shelter, and can I get fire? And then once that's taken care of, there's just the psychological stress of being the only mind. And, you know, Leanne, your question about like, are we interested in other, in strangers, or are we just interested in self-help? Like, and your anxiety, Makenna, about like, what's the value of art? For me, in any case, it comes down to an interaction with other minds. I mean, how horrible would life be if if your mind was the only mind that you could have access to. I mean, and so I think art is, I think that's what art is. It's other minds, and we go to it for familiarity and for difference and everything. Like the way these men suffer from just being the brain that whirs on itself is very relatable, and like it just seems like you're gonna crack, you know. But yeah, I think that's. I think we, you know, my little cousins came over, and one of them, the sister was showing the brother all my books, like my bookshelves, you know, like just like I was behind Leanne, and she said to her little brother, she's like, Sheila wrote all these books, and nothing had made me ever feel so sick as that idea. And like in theory, you're like, yes, I wish I'd written Crime and Punishment, and wouldn't it be amazing to write Middlemarch, and like, you know, like in your sort of secret fantasies, you're like, I wish I'd written all these great books. But when it was actually put like that, like Sheila wrote all these books, it was just actually the loneliest feeling of, oh, what if these weren't other minds that I was like collecting on my shelf, and it was all just mine. So anyways, yeah, I think we are interested in strangers.
Yeah, totally.
And strangers are not so strange. Yeah.
One day I'm going to sneak into your living room and just put by Sheila Heti on every line of stuff.
I'm curious, Leanne, because we just haven't talked at all about book cover design, and you did my cover for Motherhood, and you did Makenna's cover for The Shame, and obviously covers of so many other books. Is there something that you feel like when you go to a bookstore and you look at covers, or when you used to go to a bookstore and look at covers, is there some misunderstanding? Like there's some book covers that are just so great, and there are some that are so disappointing and awful. And what do you think, I'm not asking you to slag other designers, but like, what do you think some people get wrong in conceiving of what might be an appropriate book cover? Like what do you want? What should be put into it, and what do you think shouldn't? Do you have an aesthetics of book cover design?
Right. Well, to somebody out there, that the cover that any book winds up with is the perfect cover, right? Like those decisions get made every day on, you know, a massive scale. You know, the hope is that, you know, the art director and the publishing house they want to attract the right reader who will love what's inside, right? So I don't know, there's a lot of books, so there's almost just a trust, if you don't like the cover, you might not pick it up, and it, like, maybe that's okay. Like I don't know. I know there's also this thing, which is now book covers have to look good in thumbnail on Amazon. So tiny type and a white background just won't cut it, which makes me just want to do tiny type and white backgrounds on, like, and have the sort of title in Amazon type work better than anything. Like, there's just so many factors, and, you know, not being in those marketing meetings, I can't speak for all of the tiny little kind of compromises that have to take place. But I'm just glad I get to do covers for books of which I want to read, like of work I like. This was fun. I was actually most inspired by some of Makenna's own work, some of her own collage and cut and paste work. So yeah. Any questions from the public, from the audience?
No, the public is not questioning. We've answered them all.
That's for you. Anyway, did you have any more, Makenna?
Yeah, I have a question for you. I mean, you know, as Sheila said, which I completely agree with about the idea of strangers, I guess I wasn't thinking of other artists as strangers for some reason, because I feel connected to the ones I've felt connected to. But of course, they're strangers mostly. What about other artists? Like, I know that for me, I was thinking about film for me has been really important throughout my development, not in that I studied it or that it had anything to do with my identity, but more just, moving photography, like how deeply influenced I was by someone like Pedro Almodovar, who I was a huge fan of growing up, the Spanish filmmaker. And I felt like maybe I was thinking back on it and I was thinking that might be the first time that I really recognized myself as a woman was in his films. And I now have recently discovered Agnes Varda, who, I can't believe it took me so long. And I feel the same way again. And I'm, as if I were a child, rediscovering myself as a woman for the first time through her work. I'm just curious about both of you. Art is so integral, it seems, to your experience of both philosophy and writing and life. What is your relationship to other medium in regards to writing? And yeah.
Envy and jealousy. I can't believe the palette that directors get to work with. I mean, it's all there. It's amazing what they get to do.
There's a question from Ruby Smith, and I only was the one who received it, but I think the question is, what books have you all loved recently?
Anything that Sheila recommends to me. Pretty much. And I'm just going to say it here because I feel like I can't say it every time I recommend a book everywhere because it just sounds like I'm in love with Sheila, which I am. But Vigdis Hjorth, who Sheila is about to be in conversation with, in 2 weeks?
Yeah. She's brilliant. Yeah, she's a Norwegian writer. She just wrote a book called Long Live the Post Horn, which Makenna and I were texting about today, has just received completely obtuse reviews pretty much universally, which is such a shame. It's so awful to see incredible books being read through and the critics not seeing their brilliance. It's heartbreaking every time that happens. And I feel like that's happening in the case of this book. I'm reading a book, which again, Leanne and did the cover for with Lisa Naftalin. It's a book called Happy Hour by Marlo. I don't know how you pronounce her last name. Granados.
Granados, yeah.
Marlo Granados. It's only available in Canada right now, but I think it's just sold in the US and in the UK, but you could order it from Canada from Flying Books. It's called Happy Hour. It's so delicious and so funny and so written. It's a story of like two young women sort of on the loose in New York City, but it just has this delightful, effervescent, brilliant quality. I feel like I'm like in the 1930s or something. Anyways, it's brilliant. Yeah. Oh, here's another question. I'm reading The Awakening by Kate Chopin, and I have been thinking, is Edna a spiritual mother of Alma?
Yeah, that someone else brought up The Awakening with me before, and I definitely have a really, really old paperback on my shelf. And to be honest, I've never read it. I'm embarrassed to say. I started it recently, and then I put it down. Not that I didn't love it, but thanks for asking. And I think maybe in another consciousness, but not overtly. And Vigdis Hjorth also has a character named Alma, but in her book, A House in Norway, but I hadn't read it and I didn't know. Sheila just recommended her recently to me. So
I love Vigdis Hjorth's book.
Sorry?
What's the title of the
Long Live the Post Horn. And Horth is spelled Hjorth. Do you have a favorite book that you've just read recently, Leanne?
Oh my God, it was just on the tip of my tongue.
Or other artwork? It doesn't have to be a book.
No, it was a book. What if I'm just, God, whenever somebody asks that question, this happens.
I know, me too. I was terrified someone was going to ask this tonight.
I should just look at
It's easy for me because I'm in the middle of this book that I'm reading right now, so I didn't have to.
I can say one that I loved recently. I'm going to totally butcher their name, but Marieke Lucas Reinfeld, the Dutch writer who wrote The Discomfort of Evening, which just won the International Booker Prize. That was a really unbelievably challenging book in the moments of sort of terror and darkness, and yet
No, it is.
out just before it was too unbearable, and I found it really unsettling and unbelievable. So
Okay, so it's a Korean graphic novel called Moms, and it's about moms misbehaving, and it's amazing. It's amazing. It's written by a son. It was written by a man who was curious about his mother, and it's one of the best things I've read all year. I also read, just with a group of people, Wally Shawn's The Fever, the play, the monologue, which I found really affecting for right now, for sort of everything that's going on. So there's a little classic, but Moms.
I guess we can stop or take this one last question, which is if your feelings about art and art making have changed during COVID, etc. Do either of you want to answer that? If your feelings about making art or art making have changed in the last 6 months?
Makenna, you go.
no, I mean, I was already pretty isolated. And a lot has happened in my life, like bringing out a book. Nothing I could say feels reliable at all in regards to that. And I just want to make more, but I don't know if that has to do with COVID. But I also see that there's a question from Hillary that she was nervous to ask. I feel like I want to answer it because she said,
Okay.
Nervous.
The question is, I've heard Makenna say in interviews that the book is not really or primarily about motherhood, but it struck me as a new mom and academic that the book speaks to a wish for escape unique to motherhood. And also I'm thinking of the dinner with the professors where Alma cuts up the meat, the way that identity etches itself into a person and emerges at inopportune times. So the question is about, well, it's not a specific question, but do you want to speak to that as a...
I think it is about motherhood, and I feel bad that I have had to deny that it's about motherhood. And I think I've aggressively tried to make that point because I was so worried about people just reading it about motherhood. Not that there's anything wrong with motherhood, but it just seemed to me like there were so many other things. I didn't want to just focus on that and then have people be like, well, you have 2 kids, so why don't you talk about that? And I just feel like, well, I'd rather talk about these other things, even though I love my children. And I do think there is a feeling of escape. And I think that, again, it's like, what is motherhood and how has it been socialized? And of course, Sheila wrote the brilliant book called Motherhood about this question to a certain extent, which is, why do we attribute so much and in such a way to mothering? And why do we attribute it to women as opposed to men? And what is caretaking and what is caring for your child? Like, isn't that on a continuum? Isn't there, one can suffocate their children with love, actually. And I think I just read a book about this and I can't remember. Oh, it was that book, Sheila, the French book, Amélie Nothomb. Yeah, that book, where that book is called Strike Your Heart.
Yes, I can never remember the title, Strike Your Heart. Yeah, which is also an incredible book.
Yeah, and again, it's like this mother had she had 3 children, but in any case, the first child she rejected completely and fucked the child up. The second child, she smothered with love and fucked the child up. And so, is she a good mother? Is she a bad? Like, what does it mean? And then the third child, she approached with balance, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. So I just think, I don't know, motherhood has been commodified in a way that I think I was exploring about, like, where does ambition exist? Anyway, does ambition and art exist within motherhood? Can it exist? Or are you,
this blew my mind about motherhood, just because these women were so, they were, it is sort of a picture into another culture. And this, the stories that he's telling about these different moms, there's like 4 different moms, are so incredibly refreshing and just so sort of brutal and raw and heartbreaking, and it's all moms who are sort of have grown up kids in their 20s and teens and stuff, but Yeah, I've never seen moms depicted. Sorry, I'm like.
No, that reminds me, I have to say one other book that I love. Oh yay, I'm already ordering it from my local bookstore. I'm so excited. I like
buy this one, everyone.
Yeah. Another book that totally blew my mind, which is not a new book, but it's by this Japanese writer, Yoko Tawada, and it's called The Bridegroom Was a Dog. And it's this tiny little book, and everyone should read it. And it's really interesting. It had a real effect on me about stories in the context of the culture in which they are told. And so it tells the story of a Japanese school teacher in a rural town, and she tells these very naughty stories to her students. And the students come home and they say, "Oh, mom and dad, like, you won't believe what this crazy woman said." And the parents can't believe it. There's no way that it could be true. And so they don't believe that it's true. And they deny that it's true. And the teacher is allowed to continue telling these naughty stories. And eventually she tells the story of a dog, of a woman who falls in love with her dog, and her dog, licks her lovingly. And eventually it comes to life because it's been given this space to exist. And the dog comes to life as a man. Anyway, but I think
that's like Lady into Fox. Have you ever read Lady into Fox?
No.
It's I feel like it might have been. I think it's David Garnett is the writer, and he might have been like on the periphery of the Bloomsburg group. But it sounds like the opposite of Lady into Fox, where a woman turns into a fox.
Ooh.
Or a fox turns into a woman. I can't remember now, but yeah.
We should all order these books from McNally as though we were actually there in the flesh. But especially Makenna's book, The Shame. What a brilliant novel. Thank you so much for
thanks for asking me to do the
putting it into the world.
Oh, thank you so much to you both for everything that you create. And Leanne, thank you so much.
For a wonderful evening, and thank you to the audience. And it's been really uplifting to be sitting here looking at the news and having a good conversation about art and life.
Did something bad happen?
What's the news feed? What's happening out there?
Yeah, what happened?
Ruth Bader Ginsburg died.
Oh, fuck.
Oh no.
I'm so
no.
Oh, no.
pull you out of this moment.
Oh no. Wow. Well, there goes democracy. Anyway,
we'll all go, but please buy the book and support women. And thank you.
Thanks, Maris.
Thanks, Maris.